Hey everyone, it's Colleen with Made for Mermaids. Welcome to day 2 of our Reese Sew-a-long. Today we're going to be sewing up our side seams, sewing up our skirt seams and attaching them to the bodice, and then doing our dress placket. So first we will sew up our side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I have my bodice pieces placed with right sides together. And I'm just going to clip the side seams together, and then I'll stitch it up with my sewing machine using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then to finish those seams off, I'm just going to go over it with my serger without cutting anything off. After you finish the first side seam, go ahead and turn it around and do the second side seam and repeat the same steps. Do make sure that you finish your seams somehow. We don't want those wovens to fray, so whether that's using your pinking shears, the serger, doing French seams, whatever option you decide to do. Our next step is going to be sewing up our skirt side seams. You can set the bodice to the side. First, we'll take our back skirt, and then we'll take the front skirt pieces and put them right sides together, making sure that we match up the notches. And then when we sew up the side seams, we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just like we did with the bodice. So with your choice of pins or clips, attach those side seams. I like to start at the notch first, and then I put a clip at the top, and I put a clip at the bottom edge, and then I put all the clips in between. If you find that you're having to stretch at all, that probably means that you didn't cut either the right size, or maybe you added for height for the front skirt but not the back skirt. So just double check your pattern pieces to do a little bit of troubleshooting there. Once your side seams are clipped or pinned, go ahead and stitch those using just a regular straight stitch on your sewing machine. We're ready to repeat those same steps for the opposite side. So again, matching up notches, top and bottom edges, and then clipping in between as well. As soon as you've clipped the side seam of your skirt, go ahead and stitch that up. After your skirt side seams are ready, we are going to attach the bodice to the skirt with right sides together. Match up the side seams of both the bodice and the skirt. And it should be the bottom edge of your bodice with the top edge of your skirt. Just double check because nobody wants a skirt on their neckline. Clip or pin the side seams as well as the front raw edge, the center back of your skirt and bodice, and then put clips or pins in between as well. Again, there should be no stretching. If you are having to stretch your pieces, double check your paper pieces just to see if something went awry with your grading or measuring, cutting, fabric shifting while you were cutting, anything like that, just to do a little bit of troubleshooting. After all of your clips or pins are in place, it is time to stitch them together. We'll just use our regular sewing machine to do a straight stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, we want to finish those seams somehow since it is a woven fabric. I opted to serge again. After you have serged, go ahead and use your iron to press the seam toward the bottom, toward the skirt, away from the bodice. And then we will take a few minutes to top stitch. Top stitching is optional, of course, but it does give it a little bit more of a clean, professional finish. After top stitching, you can set your bodice to the side for just a little bit while we prepare our placket. For our dress placket, we're going to need our placket pieces for our binding as well as our fusible interfacing. I hadn't cut my interfacing yet, so I'm going to snip it really quick to the length of my binding pieces. If you bought bias tape, you'll still follow the same steps. You still want to use the same interfacing, so you'll just unfold your bias tape and put that interfacing on as well. I'm going to iron on my interfacing to my binding piece. The top sheet is just a sheet of protective paper that came with the interfacing to make sure that the glue from the interfacing doesn't get stuck to my iron. So, well, at least that's what Google Translate told me. You can also use something simple like just regular parchment paper as well. Once you've attached your interfacing, we're going to fold your binding piece in half with wrong sides together and then give it a press. The interfacing does make it a slightly bulky, but you can still fold it as best you can. Don't keep the heat on too long because again, the interfacing, the glue could cause the pieces to stick to the opposite side. You can see mine's a little bit sticky here, but not too bad. Then we'll repeat the same steps with our second binding piece. Remember, you'll need two since there are two sides to the placket. Our next step is to fold the binding in by 1/2 inch and then give that a press. Again, same thing, just be careful of your iron placement so that you don't get any of the glue on your iron or so that you don't accidentally stick the interfacing to the wrong piece of the binding. After you have done that to both binding strips, you should have 2 mirror images. We are not going to press the other side in just yet. Once you have your mirror images, we're going to attach the placket pieces to our dress. With right sides together, we're going to pin or clip the non-folded side of the binding placket piece to the front center of this dress piece. Before I head over to my sewing machine, I'm just going to repeat the exact same step with the opposite side. So again, with right sides together, I'm going to attach the non-folded side of my placket binding piece to the front center of the dress. Stitch the placket pieces to your dress with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. At this point, you can trim your seam allowance if you want, but we are going to basically refold the binding piece using all of your memory presses. So press the seam allowance toward the middle of the binding piece, and then go ahead and start placing your clips. You may want to pin this part, but I'm still going to go ahead and use clips. Once you've clipped the length of the placket, you're going to edge stitch in place. So get as close to the edge as you can, making sure to catch all of the layers in your stitch line. After edge stitching, we're going to repeat all the same steps for the opposite side. So again, I'm attaching the placket piece with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. After attaching, we will refold our binding piece to finish off that placket. Once you've finished attaching your placket pieces to both sides, that is it for day 2. So you should have sewn up your side seams, attached your bodice to your skirt, and then attached your placket. We'll see you back tomorrow for day 3.